So, good morning, people. I was shortly thinking of doing my presentation in Schweizer Mundart, but I decided I already have enough struggles learning Bavarian, and so I decided not to do that. My name is Wildeboer. As you can see, I'm Dutch, and I live in Munich, which is kind of a natural place to live for Dutch people nowadays. We have a meeting of Dutch people in Munich once a month, 400 people, where we serve wonderful Dutch specialties, stuff that people normally will never eat. It's just for us. So at Red Hat, I am what people call evangelist nowadays. So I travel across EMEA talking about open source, open standards, open knowledge, open society, open everything. And today, I just want to briefly ride you a little bit through my daily job when I'm lobbying in Brussels, when I'm talking to people, when I'm talking with CIOs about all of this open thing. If you have questions, ask immediately, because else I'm not stoppable. In 30 minutes, I cannot go into all details, so there are two things I'm going to focus on. One thing is change. Hey, it's buzzword time again. Yeah, change. Yes, we can. Financial crisis. Obama. Did I miss something? Oh, cloud computing, sorry. And the second part is vision, where this all leads to. Now, there's a famous German former chancellor called Helmut Schmidt, and he always tells everyone, if you have visions, you better visit a doctor. In my case, it makes a lot of sense, and quite a lot of people actually advise me to visit more doctors. First of all, of course, I'm here for a company. The company is called Red Hat, so let's do some marketing things. 85% of all companies worldwide use open source. This is what Gartner tells us. The very same Gartner that 5 years ago told us that Linux is the hype du jour and it will fade away. So it will be interesting to see what they're going to tell us in 5 years. 30% of all servers in Europe, this is a number from the European Commission in 2007, 30% of all servers running in companies are already running with Linux. 80% of all commercially used Linux, depending on which country you look, but there are some countries where we have 80% market share. Overall, commercially licensed, distributed Linux is what I'm talking about, not about general usage. However, 100% of Red Hat is open source. If you take our enterprise Linux distribution, there is nothing that isn't open source. There's an extra CD. On the extra CD, you will find the dirty stuff. Acrobat Reader, Flash Player, firmware for your wireless cards, but that's a separate CD. The distribution itself, 100% pure open source. So that was the marketing. What is happening out there? What we see is quite a drastic change in the way companies, people, societies, communities interact. What we see is a growing sense of when people come together, and the internet has made this big change possible. The internet has pushed transaction costs for communication to almost zero. With transaction costs being almost zero, it becomes very simple for similar people to unite in a virtual way in the internet and fight for their interests, for their hobbies and whatever. There are some very weird communities out there in the internet. There is in Facebook, if you're a member of Facebook. Who here is member of Facebook? Come on, be honest. Okay. Who is in Twitter? Who has a Twitter account? Okay, LinkedIn? Xing? Wunderbar. Who is using Linux on the desktop? See, that's a problem. It starts to work, and now we just need to convince the rest. Who's using Windows? Ah, still some. Okay, we can talk, it's no problem. The internet has changed all of this, and it will change it even more. You now hear buzzwords like cloud computing and cloud storage and all of that stuff. In my opinion, what we see is a growing trend away from applications. We don't need applications in the future. In the future, we will connect to our data in whatever way. So when I'm walking around, now, don't throw stones at me. I work at an open source company and I have a CrackBerry. The CrackBerry, when I'm on the road, is my communication method. This is how I can access my email, how I can do my Twitter feed updates, how I can access my Identica, the web and everything. And I think in the future we will see more and more of these devices wanting to connect to data. So data wants to be free. Data wants to be accessible in any way. I don't want to have the urge to install a complete full-blown application just to access my data. I want to have open ways to communicate with my data and let my data communicate with other people. And this is only possible due to the internet. The business model behind it in the past, let's go back to economy 0.5, where everybody with a cool idea was running around Silicon Valley trying to find a venture capitalist to put $6 million or $10 or $20 million into his wonderful idea. One of these perfect ideas was selling dog food via the internet. Now that's worth 20 million, wow. Nowadays it's different. I have a group in Berlin, some young people, and they call themselves Play and Build. And they say now that transaction costs and access costs with open source, access to libraries and programming functions, etc., is effectively zero, we can build first before we start thinking about making money. So they have a sort of community in Berlin where they just think about cool ideas, set up prototypes, walk around with these prototypes, get invited to a conference like this, they get the flights paid, they get the hotel paid, and that's enough. They're not interested in becoming multi-millionaires or billionaires or whatever. They just say, I want to share just as other people share with me. Now this is a growing trend that you have to keep in the back of your mind. One of the direct results of this is that top-down methods are history. What we see nowadays in companies is people come together. For example, I have this perfect example of a global company where the secretaries in 3 different countries decided that the pencils they give to their people are of really minor quality. So they grouped across these countries and made sure that the quality of the pencils they give out becomes better. That's a community. Now the one thing to learn here is communities form when there is a need, and when they've reached their goal, they fall apart. This is natural. You don't have to keep a community running forever and ever just because of the fact that it should exist. Communities form when there is a need, they separate when the need is fulfilled or it's unreachable or whatever, and then they will find a new one. So the manager of the future will become more of the facilitator. If you look at a company right now, a company today, let's go back 5 years in time. I'm the big CIO of a company, whoa. And you're starting at my company 5 years ago. And I would say, welcome to my company, son. You're now part of the family. Congratulations. Here's your corporate mobile phone, and here is your corporate laptop. And this guy would say, yes, I've done it. I had my studies, I have done everything, and now I'm the made man. This is different. Nowadays, if I am the CIO and I'm hiring this guy, and I say, here is your corporate phone, he will laugh at me and say, you know how much time I took to get my iPhone doing what I want to do? I don't want your corporate phone. And by the way, I don't want your corporate laptop, which is locked down with all sorts of security stuff and whatever. Give me a virtual machine with the stuff I need to work on, and I'll run it on my laptop. Something is fundamentally changing in the way people act. I've asked you who is in Facebook, who is everyone, whatever. Now, let's be honest. For those of you whose boss is also in the room, who doesn't use Facebook during working hours? Huh? One of the things that I've talked in Sweden to CIOs, and they told me, we're thinking of filtering Facebook. And one company actually did it. They filtered Facebook and LinkedIn and everything. What happened? Everybody bought an iPhone. Because with an iPhone, I can still connect. People want to communicate. And if you're smart, you're not going to stop them to communicate, because this generates creativity. However, this doesn't happen by itself. It needs freedom. It needs the freedom to innovate, the freedom to start something new. Don't let the past control the future. We've seen it with digital restriction management. MP3s that could only play on whatever device and etc. This is going away because the market, the consumers, we are not accepting it. We have giant power, and we don't need to unite. We don't need politicians. We don't need big shot Greenpeace or whatever stuff. We can do it ourselves by simply not buying this stuff. Nowadays, monitoring of these financial transactions is very cheap, very simple. Again, transaction costs are zero. So the seller, the company who offers you something, knows exactly when you are buying and when you're not buying, and they're learning from it. And because this needs freedom, all of these concepts of software patents and restriction management and stopping innovation with NDAs and all of that stuff simply doesn't work. What open source has shown the world is, if you allow people to communicate, if you allow people to interact with each other, the leverage is bombastic. This is not like a hedge fund where you take credits in and whatever and destroy everything that exists in this world. This is really about leveraging what's in our brains. And this is what open source has shown, and now it's moving into other directions. Look at Creative Commons. Look at what people are doing in music, in movies, open source movies, all of that. Everything suddenly is open. Wikipedia, Wikis, Wikinomics, etc. Lots of buzzwords. Now, coming back to what I'm doing in Brussels, trying to translate this feeling, which is fundamentally right in my opinion, to politicians who are living in a world of the 18th century most of the time. You know, I still have politicians in Brussels that get printouts of their emails every morning. So they're sitting there with this giant, like this. Sir, here are the emails you received over the last day. Oh, thank you. And then you will sign them off individually. Wow, that's modern age, huh? When we look at the market today, now this is of course my topic because I'm for a software company. When we look at the market today and we know about this freedom of interaction, and that helps a lot, and we look at how the market works today, it's fundamentally broken. So what we have right now, we have a market. Let's take the software market. We have big players, SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Red Hat, whoever. And these interact with each other. Now, one of the things that drives politicians and CIOs around is interoperability. Interoperability, the most famous buzzword ever. You want to be interoperable. The current way how this works is a proprietary method. Everybody makes a deal with someone else. So SAP and Microsoft, they do under NDA with lots of software patent cross-licensing agreements and all of that stuff. They do a one-to-one deal, and suddenly your SAP data pops up in Microsoft Excel. How it works exactly, you don't know. And effectively, you don't care because it just works. Over time, this becomes a spider web. Everybody has contracts and deals with everyone. It's one-to-one, it's very secretive, it's not open, it's not transparent. And the problem is now, my guys from Berlin come in and they have this wonderful, cool idea. And they want to enter this market. They have a problem because they need an army of lawyers to talk to each and everyone in this market and be allowed into this game. This is an exclusive market, a closed market. And the most important thing is there is no verification possible by third party because this is proprietary stuff. You cannot look into it. So what we are proposing in Brussels to everyone who wants to listen to us, and trust me, it's quite a lot of people, is to say, okay, we want to break this up. We want to create a level playing field where all participants have an equal chance of becoming successful. And that is open standards. Because with open standards, suddenly I can verify by an independent third party if the implementation is correct. And suddenly, the small player here from Berlin, my guys, if they implement the open standard in a correct way, they are interoperable with the rest of the market by design. No need for extra verification or whatever. Suddenly, it's by design. And that is why open standards are so important. Now, the next thing is then, of course, what is an open standard? And there are interesting definitions out there of open standards. In my opinion, and I'm radical, I'm evangelist, I'm allowed to do that. I say an open standard is only open if anyone can get it, if anyone can implement it, and he doesn't ask to ask anyone for allowance to implement it. If that is all done, it works. The European Commission, in a part of the European Commission, IDABC, was working on this for years and years. There's a European interoperability framework with a very strong definition of what an open standard is. This is under vigorous attack by some of the lobbyists in Brussels and etc. So what you see in the Commission is, you know, you have a group here, a group there, and lobbyists here and lobbyists there, and now they're all fighting. Can we find a compromise on open standards? There is no need for a compromise. There is a clear and accepted definition. Just adopt it. Because only if everyone can implement, my guys from Berlin can enter this market and innovate on top of a standard. Now, there's no need for software patents or licensing payments or whatever for that stuff. Look at MPEG, movies, and etc. I'm still officially, legally not entitled to watch DVDs on my laptop. Now, sometimes I'm quite happy about the fact because it can be very distracting to watch movies. I can only watch them legally with a legally licensed player from a legally licensed member of a legally licensed group, whatever. Their licensing scheme does not allow open source implementations because they're accounting by number of players. Now, open source says everyone can take it, so I don't have this number of how many people use my software. So here we have a typical example of how this limiting, this exclusiveness of intellectual property rights can really stop innovation. I want to watch movies. I'm not allowed to. So this needs to be fixed, and this is the task of politicians. And by the way, for the Italian government, I have quite a good idea. Mr. Berlusconi, as far as I know, he likes to sing. So maybe we could all ask Mr. Berlusconi to record the free software song with his own voice, you know, and have a CD with free software sung by Mr. Berlusconi. That will get politicians at the table here, I'm quite sure. Now, in my home country, as you all know, they took it a step further. And they said, okay, let's go for it. Let's have an action plan on this. Let's foster more open standards. and also open source. As you have noticed, in all what I'm saying, I've not once mentioned the word open source, because effectively, now this is going to get me into trouble, I don't care. If it's an open standard, I don't care if the implementation is open source or proprietary, as long as it is verifiable. I only care about the open standard. I know that over time the open source implementation will win, because I believe in that. But it's not that I'm saying you have to create a market where only open source can work or where only proprietary can work. Let's create a level playing field and then decide on technical merits, on support, on service, etc., everything a company should make money with. And if you do that, this is what the Dutch government is doing, the use of open standards. And suddenly you notice we're missing a lot of standards. Not for every part that we need a standard exists. So one of the things that I'm continuously talking about in Brussels, can we set this up? Can we set up via OSOR or whatever other possibility, a sort of organization that looks where are open standards missing and who could be working on them? So that we have this pool where you can select. So right now, if you take a look at the list of the Dutch government of the open standards they support, it's a very short list. It's HTML, it's ODF, it's JPEG, it's PNG pictures, and etc. But there are a lot of other fields that I would like to have open standards for. And if they don't exist, I think the community can come up with this. Or if it's not the community, a company can do and be paid for it. That's not a problem. So fostering more open standards is one of the most important things, in my opinion, for the politicians in Brussels. So just to note, of course, my presentation is completely open source. Don't get me wrong. The only thing that is proprietary in my presentation is the font I'm using. This is the P22 typewriter font, and it used to be free, but 3 months ago, the original author decided to put it under a proprietary license. I immediately had to pay for it because I love the font. So I'm now actively looking for a new, ugly-looking typewriter font. If you have an idea or if you have a font, please come to me after the session. I will give you a beer this evening just for a good font. Now, vision. For whatever you do, you will find a community or create your own. You will find people with the same interest. They will combine, they will unite forces. You will have lots of flame wars, you will have lots of problems. Trust me, I was in an open source project, a very successful open source project that nearly fell apart because we couldn't decide on a good name. The product was fine, the software was perfect, it was super fast, very well architectured, etc., but we couldn't decide on a name, and the project forked on 2 different projects with 2 different names. That was the only reason for the fork. Stuff like this happens. It's fine. However, if you really want to reach your goal, be defining. Really tell your people, these are my 5 most important things, so that people know why they should join a community. Don't dictate. This is what many people are doing wrong. If I start a community, it's a community of equals. And if the wisdom of the community tells me something that I don't want to hear, and I try to dictate my opinion because I think they're all stupid, I will lose anyway. I will lose my community. So do not ever dictate. And show respect to what other people are saying. And the good thing is, what you will find out is that after a while, your community starts to talk about the stuff you want to talk about. So suddenly you're listening to the stuff you want to say. And this is how you combine forces. This is how we do lobbying in Brussels. We're small. We're an open source community from very different areas, FFII, Red Hat, other companies, and etc. We don't have these big organizations and these 15,000 lobbyists that are working for us, and etc. But we don't need it, because we have open and honest arguments, and they work on their own. And they are being carried forward. They are getting more power over time. And now suddenly the Commission is talking about open standards. And on the 27th of April, there will be another small conference in Brussels with all the important people around. And again, everybody will claim that open source destroys the economy and that we are evil people and that we ask for the complete freedom of intellectual property, that we want to steal the intellectual property of the companies. Well, it might be. But an open society needs a little bit of everything. Remember, if we get this, we have a fair and equal market. So this is one of the things that Red Hat does, the $100 laptop. You can watch it outside here. Right now, we've shipped something like 20,000 devices of them to Afghanistan, to children in Afghanistan to work with computers. There's a lot of possibilities, and it goes far beyond fighting in Brussels for should it be Microsoft Office or Open Office, or should I use Outlook or Thunderbird or whatever. I mean, that's all the handy and dandy, but these kids here, You know, they learn open source the right way. For 5 years in their school, from 6 to 11 years of age, they only work with open source and free software. And when they come out of the school, they will know how to build communities. They will know how to talk. So let's wait a little bit. It's going to be interesting. Put it all together. People want to share and innovate, and you cannot stop them. You shouldn't stop them. Open standards make sure that they can really exchange their information and get it in a way that they can also access it in 10 years from now. Right now, a lot of companies are creating digital waste, unrecyclable digital waste. They buy another company, they get 20 petabyte of data written in software and stored in a format that nobody knows anymore. The company doesn't exist, so they have this data, but they can do nothing with it. In Germany, we have a very specific example for this, the so-called Stasi tapes from the former East German secret service. We cannot work with the data. Maybe it's even good. Open source will then step in on the next step. If there is an open standard, there will be an open source implementation. Small companies will combine to create a better open source implementation, so over time there will be more and more open source. Internet will drive more change, and the money to earn is not in limiting people's access to data or in stealing the data from them, as Facebook is doing with pictures and etc. The money is in creating and offering an infrastructure based on open standards and open source. Everything that has a flat rate is not a market anymore. Telephone, internet. As soon as you have a flat rate, it's just infrastructure. There's no real innovation happening there that you could charge money for. So let's keep the infrastructure open and make sure that innovation happens on top of an open infrastructure and not underneath. The old school value change. My venture capitalist gives me 20 million and I go to IPO in 1 year, and then I'm going to buy a yacht, and I'm going to compete with Larry Ellison, and I'm going to buy Red Hat, and I'm going to buy IBM. It's not working anymore. People don't need it. People don't want it. However, this new economics is for sure not an anarchy. It's just an open market based on a level playing field. And the fact that we have seen and that we are fostering with the Fedora project, with the OLPC, is we want to create or come back to this read-write economy. In the past, we had a read-write society. Everybody could talk, everybody could listen. Then, all of these monopolist companies tried to make it a read-only society. You're not allowed to copy the CD. You're not allowed to copy the MP3. With Creative Commons, with open everything, suddenly we come back to this read-write society. And that's important. With a read-write society, every consumer can be a producer at the same time, the so-called prosumer. He will act responsibly with his data. He will care about his freedom and innovation and etc. Let's make sure on the political level, on the software level and everywhere that we work on making this possible. That's the only thing I'm asking of you. And if you have questions or want to invite me to a beer and give me a wonderful typewriter font, I'm more than welcome to listen. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We now have a couple of minutes to do a short Q&A session. Are there any questions? Don't be shy. Oh yeah.
I don't have a question, but a statement you said about the DVD on your laptop. I believe in Switzerland it is actually legal to do, so it depends a bit on the legislation. I suppose that's the result of lobbying in Switzerland, that we have a relatively liberal intellectual property law at the moment.
Well, that's good to know then. So I just have to make sure I uninstall the software when I go back to Germany. Maybe I can combine it with a GPS device that automatically recognizes if I'm in Switzerland or not, and then allows me to watch a DVD or not. You know, it's these kind of artificial limits in a global, community-driven world. You know, it's problematic. It's good to know that it works in Switzerland. It would be better to know that globally I'm allowed to do this. So one of these perfect examples is Barack Obama gave a DVD to Gordon Brown. Now, Gordon Brown is legally not allowed to watch this in the UK because the one is region code 1 and the other is region code 2. So it's going to be funny. He has to travel back to the US to watch the movie, effectively. All of these artificial limitations where companies suddenly define laws because effectively they're laws. They interact with the way I interact with the media. This should stop. And politicians should really work hard on this, that they don't get blackmailed by the industry as they have been done in the past. So I'll stay in Switzerland then for my next movie. Thanks for the information. And let's hope it also works in Germany soon.
So you were talking about the open standards, which is extremely important for us to implement new stuff, right? Sometimes it's also the data that is not readily available to create new things. For instance, like you surely know the OpenStreetMap and this kind of stuff. So last year someone was talking about open data. He said now it's open source is the hype. In the future it will be open data. So what do you think about that? The open standards, open data?
Well, effectively, you know, most of the software itself is already moving into library setups. So if you're a Java programmer, you know, the code you create is like this, and you work with this load of libraries. So a lot of the code is already wandering away from direct software. And as I said, applications over time will lose their importance. It's going to be viewers for open standards-based information, streams and messages and all of that stuff. OpenStreetMap is a perfect example for that, of people simply doing it. Now, I would ask for the next step. You know, if the taxpayers all across Europe pay a lot of taxpayers' money to get these geographic information systems filled at the communities and the cities and the municipal organizations, etc., then just, you know, what you give, what you get, they should make this available under an open standard so that OpenStreetMap can simply import them. It's been paid by taxpayers anyway. So if the taxpayer has paid for it, why doesn't he get the data? It's the same, by the way, with universities. We've seen this business model being defined at universities. Universities take out patents and then make a lot of money with the patents, and that's good for research and whatever. Now, I don't buy it. I think if the taxpayer pays for research, then he should be rewarded with the results of it for free, because he's already paid for it. Now, look at universities, another perfect example, magazines. You know, in the library of your university, you have these magazines, and your university pays, say, 4,000 euro per year for whatever magazine. They're very expensive, especially medical journals. Now, suddenly, if you want to access the data you've already paid for in a digital way, you have to pay 10 times more, which is wrong. I paid for it once, now I want to use it. If you combine all of these resources that we are putting in the so-called interest of the public, but we don't let the public make any profit from it, if they're not even allowed to access it, something is wrong. What open standards can do here is simply saying, if there is an open standard and there is data here that has been paid by taxpayers, make it available under this interface. This is the open standard, this is how you can use it. I'm not asking to open up everything here, because effectively I don't care. I just want to have an interface where I can use the data. And when I use the data, it should be free to use, especially for OpenStreetMap. So no artificial restrictions on top of that. If you have to pay once for it, for the pure act of physical transfer, which is work and causing money, fine, pay once, use it for free. Slowly but surely, this is creeping into the minds of politicians. They start to understand. It needs a lot more work. So watch my blog, watch my Twitter, and etc. When I call for action, I want you all to come to Brussels and Strasbourg and stand with me in front of the parliament and ask for open access to open data. We did it with software patents. It worked quite well. We can do it again.
Yeah. Next question.
From which point of view will you look at white spots regarding open standards? Because you're looking from a global point of view. That's what I hear, and I think that's where we're going to. But when I'm in Italy or the Netherlands or wherever, I'm looking at my local and even regional or even from a time point of view. So if you're defining there's a spot and there's a spot, on which level will you take, and what will you do to bring it into work, into where it needs to get working?
I'm looking at the lowest level, at the very lowest level, because the way standards work is, you know, if it's small enough, it gets implemented very fast. So if we look at open document format is quite a beast. It's 600 pages of specification, but it's nothing compared to OOXML from Microsoft. OOXML is 7,228 pages. Now, if it comes to implementation of a standard, it should be as simple as possible. So I wouldn't ask for a general open standard on accessing the data of all Dutch citizens, because it's ridiculous. However, I know the practical problem is, for example, a hospital needs to check, is this guy who is coming to my hospital, is he really living in that address at that house or not? So that's a simple standard I would like. Such simple exchange, the glue, which is right now hidden in this proprietary closed field. I want to break up everywhere where interoperation starts. Now, to foster this is part of my task, because effectively I will make money with it. So I better help building these standards. The problem is that many companies think if they create a standard, they can also add a patent or intellectual property tax on top of the standard to make money. This is the wrong way. In my opinion, an open standard must be defined as free as possible. It can be implemented by anyone, and then I have to compete with my implementation. Now, we can go through a disastrous long list of standards that have been proposed to the Dutch authorities. You know, I know there's, by the way, something to learn. The Dutch government has a website where you can add an open standard that should be added to the list endorsed by the Dutch government. Now, you can imagine if you open that up to the public, what kind of weird stuff will be in there. But that's okay. Ask the community and you will receive 80% crap, but 20% stuff you would have never found without the community. And the job of the government, etc., is to filter this stuff. So I'm talking with the people in the Dutch government very intensively on all of these topics wherever I can, to make sure that they use, you know, the expertise is at your countries, at your cities, and etc. These people know where the problem is. If you ask them, they can agree on an open standard in a matter of seconds. Just bring them in the right place and it'll work. Especially in the Netherlands. I know, I'm Dutch, we can do it in a fast way. We don't need all of this process bullshit and 5 long years of law struggle and all of that stuff.
What you're saying is creating a good community is crucial, and that's my idea too. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I saw another question over there. Who was it? Okay.
I don't really like the example of the DVD for an open standard, because you also have standards like Blu-ray coming up, and I think we should differentiate between open standards and open source. So I don't think that Hollywood movie, for example, should be open source, which means should be copied by anyone. But I think we should have open standards for enabling people to compete professionally, to be productive.
Yep.
If you take, for example, the licensing fees of Adobe products that are almost mandatory if you want to be creative. So I think we should differentiate between simple consumerism and disabling people from producing their own stuff. I think we should draw a line and maybe also allow maybe HTTP copy protection if we are allowed by the hardware manufacturers like Sony to use them on our Linux systems. So I think this needs quite a bit of expertise by the politicians to differentiate between what is a standard and what is source, software source.
You have to make a difference between content and access. I'm not saying I want movies to be open source. I'm only saying I want to be able to play the movie I have paid for. You know, I go to a shop, I buy a DVD. I've paid my money for the DVD standard, I've paid my money for the movie and everything, but there is no legal way for me to view the stuff that I paid for. Now this is my problem. I'm not saying open source the content, I'm just saying it's my decision to use Linux, And if you're limiting my freedom by making sure that I can only watch DVDs if I use a proprietary implementation where every single player can be counted, because these are the licensing restrictions of the MPEG licensing group, of the DVD group that manages all these patents, that's the thing I want to change. And I think politicians could enforce this. They could make this mandatory, that whatever access is granted, and again, I'm willing to pay for it. That's not the problem. I'm willing to pay €100 right now for an officially legal open source implementation of a DVD player. I can buy a closed source one, but hey, it's my decision to not use closed source. That's my freedom. And this is limited by these restrictions on top. And that's where you simply need to look, is this in the interest of companies and consumers or not? Well, my opinion is clear, and there are other opinions. That's why we have a political fight, and that's a good thing. I'm radical, I know. I'm paid for that, I can do that. But I know that in practice, of course, you will have to find a balance. But the balance right now is excluding open source, especially in standards with so-called FRAND licensing. So fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory, which still means they can ask money. What we are asking for is royalty-free licensing. Now, we've already had these letters in Europe, written by BSA, of course. BSA, you know BSA? I'm not going to tell you how we call them. Ask me after the second beer this evening. It's the Business Software Alliance. And they wrote letters to the Dutch government and the Danish government that their push for open standards is in violation of the WIPO trade agreements. And they could get sued for using open standards. Now this is ridiculous. This needs to stop. So the only thing I'm asking for is I want to have the same access to the market, not based on my development model, closed source or open source, but simply by the fact that I want to participate in the market. That's what I ask from the politicians. No more, but also no less.